tragedy often drives us towards God. I think of the classic movie trope where an otherwise non-religious character, in the midst of some chaotic event, cries out, "God, please help me." And I find this human tendency to look to the divine when we're in situations beyond our control really intriguing. And it's a theme that's very present in Gulzar's Ravi Paar. What drew me to the story was the fact that even though it's an English translation, there are certain phrases that are left in their original language. And so I began to wonder if there was a hidden message within these phrases. As I investigated the English translation of these phrases and their placement within the text, it appeared to me that Gulzar had a subtle religious critique buried within his text. And immediately I began to relate it to my own Christian faith. Ravi Paar is set in the Indo-Pak partition of 1948, when colonial Britain granted India its independence and separated colonial India into Pakistan and India. And after that happened, millions of people fled from Pakistan to India, from India to Pakistan, and massive tragedy ensued. This is where we're introduced to Darshan Singh, a Sikh father of twins, who was forced to flee Pakistan with his family and run to India. Unfortunately, on his train journey towards India, one of his two sons dies, and both he and his wife mourn the child. As they're crossing the Ravi River, which is the meaning of Ravi Paar, one of his fellow train passengers whispers into his ear, "Throw the dead child into the river. You will earn God's blessing. There's no point in taking the child to India." And so Darshan grabs one of his children, throws it into the river, and then hears a scream and realizes that it's his living child, his only child that's left. And here we're introduced to the first of the three phrases that I found most significant in Ravi Paar. Hindustan Zindabad. The rest of the passengers yell this out at the same moment that Darshan realizes that he's just lost his second son. And the meaning of this phrase is "Long live India." And we see here Gulzar's intentional irony that the birth of a nation has cost a man the death of two children. The second significant phrase is "Jo boli so nihal," which means that he who says that God is eternal will be happy and fulfilled. And it's interesting that this phrase appears twice, and both times before a major tragedy within the story. The first time it appears is right before Darshan's father dies. And the second time it appears is right before Darshan throws his child into the river. And so it appears that Gulzar is trying to say that even though Darshan has turned to God, on page 43 of the text he says, in any case, God is with us. God still hasn't helped him. Darshan has said that God is eternal, but he's neither happy nor fulfilled. And this brings us to the third phrase, which is Nanak nam jahaz hai jo chare so utare par. And the meaning of this is that the name of God is a ship one boards to cross the ocean of life. And here we see the inspiration for the title of the story. Utare par, meaning cross the ocean. Gulzar relates this journey through life to Ravi Paar, Darshan's journey across the Ravi River. And when we look at the situations surrounding that crossing, first of all, we see that God did not carry Darshan across the river. Darshan crossed on a train on his own. And second of all, when Darshan was throwing the body of what he thought was his dead child into the river in pursuit of God's blessing, instead he lost a child. So it seems that Gulzar is saying that not only has God failed to carry Darshan across the Ravi, he's failed to carry him through life, and he's stolen everything from Darshan. And so this religious critique can be summed up in the idea that God is absent in tragedy. God is not willing to help. And it's very similar to what fellow author C.S. Lewis called the problem of pain. That God cannot be both all good and all powerful, because if he was all powerful, then he would stop the tragedy that's happening in the world, so he must not be all good. And if he's all good, then he must not be able to stop the tragedy in the world, so he must not be all powerful. And it's interesting because the biblical book of Job deals with this exact same question. We're introduced to an innocent man named Job, who loses everything, his children, his home, his livelihood, and he cries out to God for an answer. He says, "I am innocent, why is this happening to me?" And it's interesting because God doesn't answer his question. He simply says, "Will you question my justice? Are you as strong as God?" And so we see God is very clearly defending both his goodness and his power. And later on in the biblical narrative, we're introduced to a character named Jesus Christ, God incarnate, where God himself enters into human tragedy by dying on a cross. after he raises from the dead and thereby defeats death, he promises his followers an eternity where God's home is among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death, or sorrow, or crying, or pain. All these things are gone forever. And so, the biblical narrative contrasts with Rabbi Paar by showing that not only is God all good and all powerful, he enters into tragedy himself, and he promises an eternity where there is no tragedy. While Gulzar and others may find God to be absent in tragedy, perhaps they're just not looking far enough backwards or far enough forwards in their search for God.